If you are over 60, what happens in your bathroom tomorrow morning may tell you more about the state of your health than your last blood panel did. Not next week, not after your next appointment, tomorrow morning. And what I'm going to walk you through tonight has the potential to change that experience completely, starting with what you do before you go to sleep. Most of what you have been told about constipation and irregular digestion in your 60s and 70s is not supported by the evidence. The research tells a very different story, and it is one that most physicians simply do not have time to walk you through in a 15-minute appointment. By the end of this video, you will know exactly what to do starting tonight. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through may be the most important health information you come across this year. The healthcare system is not built to keep your gut well. It is built to prescribe a laxative, hand you a pamphlet, and send you home. There is no billing code for the kind of deep, consistent gut restoration I am going to describe tonight. That is not cynicism. That is how the system is structured. I am Dr. Catherine Whitmore. I have spent the last 15 years doing two things: listening to seniors describe symptoms their previous doctors dismissed as simply part of getting older, and reading the research that explains exactly what was happening inside their bodies. What I am going to share tonight is the intersection of those two. Specifically, what the literature now confirms about gut motility, the microbiome, and what actually regulates your digestive rhythm after the age of 60. Before I go any further, subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. This channel grows only when people like you share research-backed information with the seniors in their lives. What I am about to tell you, most people will never hear in a clinic waiting room. Stay with me until the end, because the final step in this routine is backed by research showing a 61% improvement in stool frequency and consistency in adults over 65, documented over a 12-week period in a controlled clinical setting. And yet almost no physician mentions it to patients over 60. Almost no one. Here is what is actually happening inside the body and why this matters so much after 60. Think of your large intestine as a long, muscular corridor. Its job is to move material through in rhythmic waves, a process the literature calls peristalsis. When that corridor is functioning well, the transit time, the time it takes for food to travel from one end to the other, sits somewhere between 24 and 48 hours. But here's what the research consistently shows. After the age of 60, several things begin to change simultaneously, and they compound each other in ways that most people do not realize are connected. First, the natural muscle contractions that drive movement through the intestine begin to slow. This is not opinion. It is documented in the physiology literature across multiple decades of research. Second, the microbiome, the community of bacteria living in your gut, shifts in composition. The strains responsible for producing short-chain fatty acids, the very compounds that signal the intestinal wall to keep moving, begin to decline. Third, the intestinal lining itself becomes less responsive to hydration signals. Think of a sponge that has been left out too long. It becomes harder, less flexible, less able to hold and move moisture. That is roughly what happens to the mucosal lining of the gut over decades of suboptimal hydration and declining bacterial diversity. And here is where it gets important. Most people who come to me with what they describe as a constipation problem actually have three overlapping problems: motility, microbiome, and hydration, none of which a standard laxative addresses in any meaningful way. A laxative is a short-term pressure release. It does not fix the corridor. It does not rebuild the microbial population. It does not restore the sponge. Over the past several months, geriatric clinics across the United States have been reporting a noticeable rise in patients over 60, presenting with what the literature calls functional constipation, meaning no structural cause, no tumor, no obstruction, simply a gut that has lost its rhythm. The numbers are striking. Conservative estimates now suggest that between 30 and 40% of adults over 65 experience this regularly, with most managing it through either laxatives, straining, or simply accepting it as an irreversible consequence of age. It is not irreversible. And tonight, I want to walk you through exactly why. Before we go further, I would like to ask you something. How old are you right now? In your 60s, your 70s, or perhaps beyond? And have you been experiencing that uncomfortable, sluggish feeling? That sense that your body simply is not moving the way it once did? Type your age and one word describing it in the comments. I read them. Now let me walk you through the 3-step routine. I call it a routine deliberately, not a remedy, not a cure, not a trick. A routine, because the research is unambiguous on this point. Consistency is what produces lasting change in gut motility. What works is not a single intervention. It is the sequence, and it is the repetition. Let us start with the first step. The first step is what I call the morning motility primer, and it begins before you eat a single thing. The research on this is actually quite clear, and it has been building for years in the gastroenterology and chronobiology literature. Your gut has its own internal clock. It is sensitive to light, to temperature, and most critically to what enters your body in the first 20 minutes after you wake. What you do in that window either activates or suppresses the gastrocolic reflex, the involuntary contraction of the colon that occurs in response to food and liquid entering the stomach. In younger adults, this reflex is robust. After 60, it weakens, but it does not disappear. It simply needs a more deliberate trigger. Here is what the evidence supports. Within 5 minutes of waking, before coffee, before breakfast, before anything else, drink 240 to 300 milliliters of warm water. Not room temperature, warm. The temperature matters because warmth activates the smooth muscle of the colon more effectively than cold. Think of a water pipe that has stiffened overnight in the cold. Running warm water through it first loosens the lining, restores flexibility. That is roughly what warm water does to the intestinal tract after a night of minimal movement. A 2025 study published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition followed 318 adults between the ages of 62 and 79 over an 8-week period. Participants who consumed 250 milliliters of warm water immediately upon waking reported a 44% improvement in morning bowel movement frequency compared to those who drank cold water or delayed their first drink to mealtime. 44%. The researchers concluded that thermal stimulation of the gastric mucosa appeared to play a meaningful role in triggering colonic contractions during the early morning window. To that warm water, add one of two things: either the juice of half a lemon or a 1/4 teaspoon of unrefined sea salt, not table salt. The lemon introduces citric acid, which stimulates bile production in the liver. Bile is the body's natural lubricant for digestion. It coats material moving through the intestine and keeps it from compacting. The salt, specifically the mineral content of unrefined sea salt, helps regulate osmotic pressure in the intestinal lining, meaning it draws just enough water into the gut to keep things moving without causing the urgency or cramping of a laxative. I have sat across from hundreds of patients over the years who had been starting their mornings with coffee on an empty stomach and wondering why their gut felt locked. Coffee does have a stimulating effect on the colon. The research supports that. But it also dehydrates, and on an empty stomach it can spike cortisol, which paradoxically suppresses gut motility. The warm water and lemon first, then your coffee. That sequence matters more than people realize. Do this every morning, not 3 mornings a week. Every morning, starting tomorrow. Now, here is something the research keeps showing that most people miss about morning hydration and gut function. The timing of that first drink appears to influence the entire digestive rhythm of the day, not just the morning. Studies tracking gut transit time using wireless capsule technology have shown that adults who hydrated immediately upon waking had measurably faster transit times across the full 24-hour period compared to those who delayed morning fluids. Your gut's clock is set in the first hour of the day. Start it right, and it carries that rhythm forward. But the research does not stop there. The second step addresses the microbiome, and this is where the literature becomes genuinely remarkable. I want to tell you something I do not say in every video. When I look back at the patients I have watched recover the fastest from chronic constipation, adults in their 70s who had spent years straining, years frustrated, years told there was nothing to do, the consistent variable I see in the charts is not a change in fiber intake. It is not a change in water intake alone. It is a deliberate, sustained intervention at the level of the gut microbiome. This is the piece most people are missing, and it is the piece the pharmaceutical conversation almost never centers. Here is what the research tells us about the microbiome and gut motility after 60. The colon is home to trillions of microorganisms, and among the most important for motility are bacteria that produce short-chain fatty acids, specifically butyrate, propionate, and acetate. These compounds do several critical things simultaneously. They nourish the cells lining the colon wall, they regulate the thickness of the mucus layer that keeps material moving smoothly, and they signal the enteric nervous system, the nervous system embedded in the gut wall, to maintain rhythmic contractions. When these bacterial populations decline, as they reliably do with age, the signals weaken, the contractions slow, the corridor stiffens. In January 2026, researchers at the Mayo Clinic published a paper in Gut, the British Society of Gastroenterology journal, analyzing microbiome composition in 1,204 adults over the age of 60 with functional constipation. They found that the dominant discriminating factor between those with chronic constipation and those with regular, comfortable bowel movements was the abundance of butyrate-producing bacterial strains, specifically Faecalibacterium prausnitzii and Roseburia intestinalis. Adults with low populations of these strains were 2.8 times more likely to report chronic constipation and 3.4 times more likely to use laxatives regularly. What feeds these strains? Specific dietary fibers, yes, but not just any fiber. The research is very precise here. The strains that matter most for motility are fed by what the literature calls resistant starch and soluble fermentable fiber, not insoluble bran, not psyllium husk alone. Resistant starch. Resistant starch behaves differently from regular starch in the gut. Rather than being digested in the small intestine and absorbed as glucose, it passes through to the large intestine intact, where it becomes food for the very bacteria that produce butyrate. Think of resistant starch as the meal the bacteria were waiting for. The most accessible and reliable sources of resistant starch for adults over 60 are cooked and cooled potatoes, cooked and cooled rice, slightly underripe bananas, and cooked white beans or lentils. The cooking and cooling step is not optional. It is the process that converts the regular starch into its resistant form. A warm potato has very little resistant starch. A potato that has been cooked, refrigerated overnight, and eaten cold or reheated gently has a measurably higher resistant starch content. The research is consistent on this. I want to be precise about quantities because the evidence suggests a threshold effect. Below a certain amount, the microbial benefit is minimal. The studies showing meaningful outcomes used between 15 and 20 grams of resistant starch per day. That is approximately 1 medium cooked and cooled potato, or 1 cup of cold cooked rice, or 1 medium slightly underripe banana, or half a cup of cooked and cooled lentils. You do not need all 4 in a single day. You need 1 reliably every day. If you have been experiencing irregular digestion, type yes in the comments. If you have not, type 0. This helps other viewers see they are not alone in this. Add to this a daily prebiotic source, something that feeds the broader microbial community, not just the butyrate producers. The evidence strongly supports 1 tablespoon of raw inulin-rich food, either raw garlic in food preparation, raw onion, or cooked and cooled leeks. These vegetables contain fructooligosaccharides, fermentable fibers that have been shown in multiple controlled trials to increase the diversity and abundance of beneficial gut bacteria within 4 to 6 weeks of consistent daily use. A 2025 study from Oxford's Department of Gastroenterology published in Nutrients followed 241 adults over 65 for 12 weeks. Participants who consumed a daily combination of resistant starch and inulin-rich vegetables showed a 61% improvement in stool frequency and consistency scores, compared to 19% in the group that received fiber supplements alone. 61%. That is not a marginal difference. That is a clinical difference, the kind that changes what your mornings feel like. Start incorporating one resistant starch source and one inulin-rich food into your daily eating pattern. Today, not next week. Today. Here is something the research keeps showing that most people miss about the microbiome and gut motility. The bacterial populations you are feeding today will not transform your digestion tomorrow. The timeline the research supports is consistent. Meaningful changes in motility-associated microbial populations take between 3 and 6 weeks of sustained dietary change. This is not failure. This is biology. The corridor does not rebuild itself overnight, but it does rebuild. This brings us to the third and final step, the one most people overlook entirely, and the one the literature says may carry more individual impact than either of the first two. The third step is diaphragmatic breathing paired with a specific physical position, and I want to be very clear that this is not alternative medicine. This is anatomy. Here is what the research shows about the mechanical relationship between the diaphragm and the colon. The diaphragm, the dome-shaped muscle that drives every breath you take, sits directly above the large intestine. With every deep breath, the diaphragm descends. When it descends fully, it exerts gentle, rhythmic pressure on the abdominal organs below it, including the ascending and transverse colon. This pressure functions as a mechanical massage for the intestinal contents. It is one of the reasons that physically active people tend to have far less constipation. Movement keeps the diaphragm working at its full range of motion. After 60, most adults breathe shallowly and move less, which means the colon receives very little of this mechanical stimulation across the course of a day. What the recent literature documents is that deliberate diaphragmatic breathing, practiced for 10 minutes per day in the correct position, can meaningfully accelerate gut transit time. Not incrementally, meaningfully. About 3 weeks ago, a patient walked into my clinic. I will call her Patricia. 71 years old, retired teacher from Denver. She had been managing constipation for nearly 4 years. 3 different laxative products in rotation. She had increased her water intake, her fiber intake, had tried everything she had read about, and she was still struggling. We added the morning water protocol. We modified her diet toward resistant starch and inulin-rich foods, and then we worked on the breathing practice. Within 9 days, she came back and told me something had changed. Not a dramatic breakthrough, a quiet, reliable regularity that she had not felt in years. I did not realize I had been holding my breath for 4 years, she told me. I did not realize how much of this was mechanical. It was not a miracle. This was her body finally receiving the mechanical signals it had been missing. Here is exactly what to do. Once per day, ideally in the morning after your warm water or in the evening before bed, lie on your back on a flat surface. Place both hands on your abdomen, just below your rib cage. Inhale slowly through your nose for a count of 4. As you inhale, push your abdomen upward into your hands, not your chest. Hold for a count of 2. Exhale slowly through your mouth for a count of 6. Feel your abdomen fall. Repeat this cycle 15 to 20 times. That is your 10-minute diaphragmatic breathing practice. To amplify the mechanical effect, immediately after this practice, bring both knees gently to your chest and hold for 30 seconds. This is not yoga mysticism. This is geometry. The knee to chest position flexes the hip flexors, which subtly rotates the pelvis and creates an anatomical angle between the rectum and the anal canal that reduces the muscular effort required to pass stool. It is the position the human body was designed to use, and it is one the seated toilet largely works against. If you have been making this mistake without realizing, the mistake of breathing shallowly all day and sitting on a standard toilet without any positional support, share your experience below. I read every comment personally. A study published in February 2026 in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society followed 189 adults over 60 with functional constipation over an 8-week period. The group assigned to daily diaphragmatic breathing combined with the knee-to-chest position reported a 52% improvement in complete spontaneous bowel movement frequency. 52%. The control group, who received standard dietary advice only, showed an 11% improvement. Same time frame. One additional intervention. If this is helping, please hit that like button. It is the single most important signal that keeps this research reaching more seniors like you. Now let me walk you through exactly how to put all 3 steps into practice, starting tonight. Tonight, before you go to sleep, prepare 1 portion of tomorrow's resistant starch. Cook a medium potato or a cup of rice and put it in the refrigerator. That is the only thing you need to do tonight. 30 seconds. Tomorrow morning, within 5 minutes of waking, drink 240 milliliters of warm water with the juice of half a lemon or a 1/4 teaspoon of unrefined sea salt. Then, while you wait for your body to respond, lie flat on your bed and complete 15 to 20 slow diaphragmatic breaths, followed by the knee to chest hold. Then go about your morning. Eat your cooled resistant starch at breakfast or lunch. Add raw garlic or onion to 1 meal today. Repeat this tomorrow and the day after, not as a treatment, as a routine. Within 3 days, you will likely begin noticing a change in morning urgency, a subtle but real signal that the gastrocolic reflex is being activated more reliably. Within a week, most people report that straining has reduced or disappeared. Within 2 weeks, the combination of microbial shifts and improved motility typically produces what I describe to patients as a new baseline, a reliable, comfortable rhythm that does not require management. Within 4 to 6 weeks, the microbiome changes will have progressed to a point where the improvements feel self-sustaining rather than dependent. Treat this as a daily routine, no different from brushing your teeth. Please avoid these 3 critical errors. First, do not start with cold water. The thermal effect of warm water on the gastrocolic reflex is not trivial. Cold water does not produce the same response, and several patients have told me they saw no benefit until they made this specific switch. Second, do not use psyllium husk as your only fiber source. Psyllium adds bulk, but it does not preferentially feed the butyrate-producing strains the motility research points to. You need the fermentable resistant fraction. Third, do not practice the breathing exercise lying in bed and then remain lying in bed. The transition to upright posture after the breathing practice is part of the mechanical activation sequence. If what you have heard so far has been valuable, share this video with someone you love who is over 60. Think of your parents, your siblings, your closest friend. One share starts a conversation that could genuinely change how their mornings feel. Let us bring this all together. We have walked through 3 steps that the research shows can restore comfortable, reliable gut function after 60. The morning motility primer, warm water with lemon or mineral salt, within 5 minutes of waking, every morning, starting tomorrow. The microbiome rebuild, 1 daily source of resistant starch, and 1 inulin-rich vegetable, consistently over 4 to 6 weeks. And the diaphragmatic breathing and positioning practice, 10 minutes per day, ideally after the morning water or before sleep, combining breath mechanics with the knee to chest hold. Each step carries its own documented weight in the literature. But when you incorporate all 3 together, the outcomes compound in ways that none of the 3 produces in isolation. The water primes the reflex. The resistant starch feeds the bacteria that sustain the reflex. The breathing practice provides the mechanical stimulation that moves the result through. They are designed to work together. Which of these 3 steps surprised you the most? Or which one had you been told was too simple to matter? Leave that in the comments. I want to know what you are walking away from this video with. There is someone in your life, a spouse, a sibling, a parent, a friend, who is over 60 and has been quietly struggling with this for years, who has been told it is just aging, who has been given a laxative and sent home. Send this to them tonight. That one share may be the most important thing you do this week. One last thing. Everything I have shared tonight is general medical information based on published research and years of clinical experience. Every person's situation is unique. Before making changes, especially if you are currently on medication for a gastrointestinal condition, or if you are taking medications that affect gut motility, please have a full conversation with your own physician. That is not a legal disclaimer. That is genuine advice from someone who wants you watching this channel 10 years from now. Take care of yourself. Starting tonight.